response to the comments made on the Republican side about the other two nominees, the ABA rated Judge Bjelkengren qualified to serve on the district court. As a Washington Superior Court judge, she presided over 130 jury and bench trials. As an assistant attorney general for the Washington Attorney General's office, she tried more than 150 cases. Judge Cruz was rated unanimously well qualified by the American Bar Association. During his 17 years in private practice, he tried 18 cases to verdict, including 15 as sole or chief counsel, 2018 unanimously appointed by the active duty district judges to serve as a magistrate. In his time on the bench, he's already issued more than 1,700 recommendations and orders and has presided over 5 jury trials. These nominees' records as litigators and as judges are the best indicators of their abilities. Our response during the hearing does not negate One response during the hearing does not negate a lifetime of service. Justice Amy Coney Barrett had trouble with a question. She was asked to name the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. She could not do that. Yet she was quickly dispatched to the Supreme Court with every Republican voting in favor of her nomination. Senate Republicans clearly did not take that misstep to be an indicator of her abilities. They confirmed her to the highest court in the land. And I might note, when she was up for circuit judge, she was asked to list the prominent cases in her legal background. She was given an opportunity to list 10. She listed 3. Since the 1980s, the ABA has rated a total of 22 judicial nominees not qualified to serve as federal judge since 1980. President Trump accounted for 10 of these nominees, 8 of whom were ultimately confirmed with strong support from Senate Republicans. So I just say that when it comes to nominees' trial experience and answering questions, there's not a consistent record on the other side.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to recognize the senator from Texas again, but I ask him to please let us get to a roll call.
So I'll say 2 things briefly. Number one, Mr. Chairman, you've just made a very powerful and effective indictment of the ABA and its role in judicial confirmations. You're right, the ABA has been wildly partisan, so they routinely find Republican nominees to be unqualified, even when they have decades of experience and very significant experience. And I got to say, if the ABA tells you that if you don't know what Article 2 of the Constitution is, and you've only tried 7 cases, mostly driver's license revocation cases, you're qualified to be a federal judge, well, then the ABA ought to get out of the business of rating judges. And I'll just ask my colleagues something. Every one of you, answer this question to yourself seriously. If you were interviewing a chief counsel, all of us have chief counsels on this committee. If you're interviewing a law clerk, and the interviewee, if you ask that interviewee, what's Article 2 of the Constitution, and that person said, damned if I know, would you hire him? You all know the answer is no. None of you would hire someone who didn't know what Article 2 was to be a law clerk on your judiciary staff, and yet you're all prepared to rubber stamp this person as an Article 3 judge. Let me say, secondly, very briefly, I understand why the senator from California wants to distance himself from the record of Judge Gaston, and he suggested that her report was, I think the language he used was common sense recommendations. Well, you know, John Adams famously said facts are stubborn things, so I will point out, I have that report right here in my hand. It is called Position Paper on Sex Offender Residence Restrictions. So it's all about, where can sex offenders live? Can they live next to schools? Can they live next to kindergartens? Can they live next to daycares? Yes or no? Judge Gaston helped author it, and the verbatim quotes, quote number 1, quote, children are not safer because registered sex offenders are prohibited from residing near schools, parks, daycare centers, and other places where children tend to gather. Quote number 2, the conclusions and recommendations, in other words, what they're saying in this report, are that, difficult as it might be, laws that regulate where sex offenders may not live should be repealed or substantially modified in the interest of public safety. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the entire report be entered into the record so that people can read it and see that it says exactly what I'm quoting from.
Without objection.
And I have to say to my friend from California, if saying sex offenders should be allowed to live next door to daycare centers is common sense, then that's a very different definition of common sense than most people in Texas, and I suspect most people in virtually all of our states.
So I've given latitude in speaking to those who wanted to speak to these nominations, and at this point, I'm going to call for the vote. Charnel Bjelkegren nominated to the Eastern District of Washington. The clerk will call the roll.